This is the story of how a man with no formal authority, no commission, no flag, and no legal standing commanded 300 armed criminals across a fleet of 4 ships and kept them obedient. Edward Teach, the man the world remembers as Blackbeard, sailed as a pirate for only 2 years. In that short window between 1680, when historians believe he was born in Bristol, and November 22nd, 1718, when he was killed at Ocracoke Inlet, he built one of the most disciplined criminal organizations on the open ocean. The methods he used to do it were stranger, smarter, and more legalistic than the legend suggests. Most of Blackbeard's men had spent years in the Royal Navy or on merchant vessels before turning pirate. They knew what authority looked like under the British Crown. They had been flogged for falling asleep on watch, starved for shortages they did not cause, and hanged for petty theft. Many of them had run to piracy precisely to escape that world. So the moment they stepped onto a pirate deck, they were not interested in another tyrant. They had seen one. They had defected from one. A captain who tried to rule the way a Navy lieutenant ruled was a captain who would be voted out within weeks, marooned on a sandbar, or shot in his sleep. Charles Vane learned this firsthand. In 1718, his own crew removed him from command for refusing to engage a French warship they wanted to attack. His replacement was John Rackham, the man history would later call Calico Jack. Blackbeard knew the rules of the world he had entered. He had learned them under Benjamin Hornigold, and he understood that to hold a crew of several hundred men together, he could not rely on rank. He had to build a system. That system began with a contract. Before any new sailor stepped aboard a pirate vessel during the golden age of piracy, he signed his name or his mark to a set of written articles. These articles were the working constitution of the ship. They specified the share each man would receive of any prize taken, the compensation owed to a man who lost a hand or a leg in battle, the penalties for striking another crew member, the penalties for cowardice, the penalties for theft from a fellow pirate, and the conditions under which a captain could be removed. Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate of the era by sheer tonnage captured, required his crew to swear that they would not gamble on board. Other captains banned women on the ship, banned fighting below decks, and required lights out at 8 in the evening. The articles of Blackbeard's company have not survived in full, but contemporary accounts describe a code along similar lines. What mattered was not the specific clauses. What mattered was that every man knew the rules in advance, had agreed to them in writing, and could not later claim ignorance. Pirate justice was not arbitrary. It was contractual. The captain on a pirate ship had absolute authority in only one situation, and that was during combat. The moment the cannons stopped, his authority dissolved into something much smaller. Day to day, the most powerful man aboard was not the captain, but the quartermaster. He was elected by the crew, just as the captain was elected by the crew, and he was the man who distributed food, allocated plunder, disciplined minor offenses, and served as the crew's representative against the captain himself. If the captain wanted to change course, board a vessel, or punish a man, he had to convince the quartermaster, or he had to convince the crew in what the records call a general consultation, which was effectively a shipboard vote. This was a working democracy at sea, 60 years before the American Revolution and 70 years before the French. Blackbeard operated within that structure. He did not abolish it. He worked it. He chose his quartermasters carefully, kept them loyal through shares of plunder, and used the legitimacy of the system to make his own commands look like the will of the ship rather than the whim of one man. Alongside that contractual democracy, Blackbeard built a parallel system designed to make himself personally terrifying. His beard was the obvious part of it. He braided it, tied it with black ribbons, and grew it to a length that contemporaries described as nearly covering his chest. Before going into battle, he did something no other pirate of his era is recorded to have tried. He tucked lit slow matches, the same hempen fuses used to fire cannon, under the brim of his hat. As he stepped onto a captured deck, smoke curled from his face. His eyes appeared to glow through it. The accounts say he looked like a man stepping out of hell. This was not vanity. This was operational theater. The cost of taking a ship without firing a shot, because the crew of that ship surrendered the moment Blackbeard appeared on deck, was lower than the cost of a real fight in every category that mattered. Less ammunition spent, fewer of his own men wounded, less damage to the captured vessel he intended to sell. The smoking beard was not a costume. It was a budget tool. The most famous demonstration of Blackbeard's authority happened not on a captured deck, but in his own cabin. He was drinking with two of his officers, including a man named Israel Hands, the sailing master of the Queen Anne's Revenge. According to the account compiled by Charles Johnson in 1724, Blackbeard drew two pistols under the table, crossed them, and fired without warning. One ball struck Israel Hands in the knee and crippled him for life. When asked why he had done it, Blackbeard reportedly replied that if he did not now and then kill one of them, they would forget who he was. Whether that line is exact or whether it was polished by Johnson for publication, the point of the act was understood by every man aboard. Authority on a pirate ship was not assumed. It had to be performed. It had to be visible. A captain who never frightened his own crew was a captain whose orders could be debated. A captain who occasionally crippled a friend at random was a captain whose orders moved instantly. Israel Hands survived the wound. He would later testify against his old captain at trial in Virginia, and his evidence helped hang the surviving members of the company. But on the day he was shot, his fellow officers learned the limits of familiarity. In May of 1718, Blackbeard demonstrated what a disciplined pirate fleet could do against a colonial capital. He brought 4 ships and roughly 400 men into the harbor of Charlestown in South Carolina, which is known today as Charleston. He blockaded the port. He seized passengers from outbound vessels and held them hostage. And then he made a demand that was, by the standards of piracy, almost gentle. He wanted a chest of medicine. The wreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge, discovered off Beaufort, North Carolina in 1996, contained large quantities of mercury, which in the early 18th century was the standard treatment for syphilis. The crew, in other words, was sick. Blackbeard, instead of sacking the town, ransomed it for what amounted to a pharmacy run. The colonial authorities complied. The hostages were released alive. The fleet sailed away. The episode is often told as a curiosity. It was, in fact, a perfect demonstration of his system. Discipline held the blockade for days. Discipline kept the hostages alive when killing them would have been easier. Discipline secured a concrete material outcome for the men. The crew obeyed because the captain delivered. Within weeks of Charleston, the system began to fail. Blackbeard ran the Queen Anne's Revenge aground on a sandbar at Beaufort Inlet on the 10th of June, 1718. The testimony given by David Herriot at the later trial of Stade de Bonnet alleged that the grounding was deliberate, a maneuver to break up the fleet and shed obligations so that Blackbeard could keep more of the treasure for fewer men. Whether or not the grounding was planned, the effect was the same. He marooned a portion of his own crew, accepted a royal pardon in Bath, North Carolina, and tried to retire. He could not retire. By November of that same year, he was operating out of Ocracoke. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy was sent to find him. On the 22nd of November, 1718, they found each other. According to the eyewitness accounts, it took 5 musket balls and roughly 20 cutlass wounds to bring Blackbeard down. His head was cut from his body and hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's sloop on the voyage back to Virginia. Edward Teach commanded 300 armed criminals for 2 years without a flag, without a state, and without a single law to back him. He did it by combining a written contract that every man had signed, an elected officer who could check him, and a personal performance of menace so disciplined that grown sailors believed he was a creature from hell. The articles, the quartermaster, the smoking beard, the shot under the table at Israel hands. These were not the chaos of a lawless man. They were the architecture of one of the most carefully governed criminal enterprises of the 18th century. The man the world remembers as a monster ran his ship like a magistrate, and the moment the system loosened at Beaufort Inlet, he had 6 months left to live.